Welcome to our final panel, Race on the Premodern Stage, Part 2. Each of our four presenters will speak for 10 minutes each. And just to let you all presenters know, I'll be giving you a 2-minute warning in the chat. So don't be surprised if you see that come up. We don't want to alarm you. We just want to make sure we give everyone the amount of time they need so we can get to the Q&A. So after presentations are finished, we'll begin the Q&A for our fellow panelists who have joined the conference and attendees. Feel free to drop a question into the Q&A or directly into the chat at any time during this panel. In order to save time, we will be putting the bios in the chat so you can learn more about each of our presenters. So without further ado, we are going to start with our first presenter, Yujin Jang from University of Pittsburgh, with a paper entitled The Formation of Temperate Race, Music and Early Modern Ideology of Cultivation.
Okay, so I'll try to share my screen, and could you please can you see my PPT? Okay, thanks. So I'll just begin. So my this paper, The Formation of Temperate Race, Music and Early Modern Ideology of Cultivation, is actually part of my paper titled Musical Ecology of Beating and Politics of Race Making in Shakespeare's A Tempest. So rather than doing a case study, I want to introduce the theoretical background of my argument about how music engages with the play's politics of race making. In The Tempest, when Ferdinand is shipwrecked on a new island during his journey from Tunis to Naples, he hears Ariel singing. Grieving for death of his father, he recognizes that the music has soothed him, as depicted in many pre-modern medical treatises. For example, like this one, Thomas Wright's The Passions of the Mind in general. Early modern notions of passion was related to the humors. This view of the passion, um, okay, illuminates Ferdinand's speech. Music mitigates Ferdinand's passion, and by doing so, it changes his humoral conditions, stating that the music allays both the tempest fury and my passion. Ferdinand links the condition of his passions to that of his body's surroundings. By the command of Prospero, Ariel sings the song to help Ferdinand to regulate his passions. This act draws attention to early modern colonialist discourse about unruly passions, which should be controlled because they can hinder individual self-control and cause degenerated bodily conditions. Functioning as a medium for bodily and emotional regulation, Ariel song signals the politics of temperance, which European settlers have called a virtue while distinguishing themselves from the intemperate New World native subjects. By allaying both fury and passion, music shapes political bodies by controlling the inner storm of individuals. More broadly, it suggests that music can regulate the order of the colonial world, bringing order to the distemperate states of Ferdinand's passions and the tempestuous weather. The music helps Prospero exert dominion over the colonial island, including the human body and the natural world. By setting the tempest in the context of pre-modern European travelers' exploration into the New World, Shakespeare develops a discourse about the relations of music, physical conditions of the body, and geographical locations that are remote from the European traveler's homeland. For instance, in Act 2, Scene 1, when Ariel enters the stage and plays solemn music, Gonzalo feels very happy, and this speech resonates with Alonso's remark that he is wondrous happy. Interestingly, Antonio responds that the cause of the strange drowsiness which possesses Alonso and Gonzalo is the quality of the climate. In the foreign land, the Neapolitan characters experience a climate that is different from that of their homeland, and they attribute the changes in their bodily conditions to the quality of the island's air. The cases of Ferdinand, Alonso, and Gonzalo illustrates how Shakespeare designed a musical version of joy humoralism, a term coined by Mary Floyd Wilson, showing how music makes shift in the place ecology of the passions. In The Tempest, Shakespeare constructs the musical geohumoralism by drawing on pre-modern concepts of race, which was developed in relation to contemporary understandings of the humors. According to Kimberly and Coles, early modern people often believed that skin color was one of the indexes of individuals' humoral disposition, which was conceived as a determinant factor of their morality. This nexus of skin color, humors, and morality was established upon contemporary religious discourse, which suggests that, quote, any fault of humor could corrupt the soul's capacity to receive Christianity and contaminate the will to virtue, end quote. This linkage between individuals' moral faculty and humoral conditions forms a race concept categorizing the white and non-white body. Such analysis allow readers of The Tempest to reinterpret the scene where Ariel plays music for Ferdinand. Ariel's song not only mitigates Ferdinand's grief, but also tempers his passions, preventing the deterioration of his humoral conditions. To preserve his humoral balance, which is related to his white European identity, Ferdinand grief should be assuaged. Jean Fury also offers insightful commentary on discourses of the passions and degeneracy in pre-modern colonialist plantation. According to Fury, historical episodes of European travelers' adventures to the New World show how their physiological conditions could be degenerated by new geographical and climatic environment in land distant from Europe. When environmental changes alter those humoral conditions that are linked to individuals' religious and moral characteristics, controlling the blood is essential for achieving temperance. At the same time, however, there was a perception that planters' blood was already in danger due to their stays on alien soils. To dispel such anxiety over degeneration throughout the play, Prospero continually asserts his somatic sameness with the newcomers from Italy. Having a body that beats as of flesh and blood, for instance, he suggests that his blood conditions have been well preserved in the foreign land. He employs music to control the physiological conditions of other Neapolitan characters' bodies, including the passions of Ferdinand, preventing them from degenerating in the alien climate. My research contributes to the pre-modern history of race by investigating music in early modern race making, which is a topic that has been understudied in existing interdisciplinary scholarly studies of pre-modern constructions of race. I think that both critical analysis of early modern music and race and studies of music in early modern literature required more attention. And one recent work that considers music and race in the early modern era is Dennis Britton's studies of religious formation of race in the Merchant of Venice. According to Britton, Lorenzo's speech to Jessica is remarkable because he considered the transformability of Jessica's identity while interrogating her capacity for paying attention to music. In this speech, Lorenzo considered that the cause of the whiteness of animals is the hot condition of their blood, and claims that this condition of the blood can be altered by music. If the quality of the blood can be changed by the power of music, Jessica's religious conversion is also possible by her sensitivity to music, even when the blood refers to individuals' inherited unchanged traits. Music is essential to our understanding of early modern construction of race and is an element that functions similarly to religion or education, practiced for cultivating the manner of people and transforming their social identity. In this context, interpreting music in the politics of pre-modern race making requires what Patricia Hachimi calls the ideology of cultivation. According to Hachimi, conduct, which is a set of socially meaningful behaviors, is a key idiom for negotiating social difference in early modern culture, and cultivation refers to the status of accepted strategies for self-improvement by means of conduct. My reading of The Tempest with a focus on music joins these recent studies of early modern race by investigating Shakespeare's discourse of beating and the pulse of the body as a form of early modern race making. Similar to The Merchant of Venice, The Tempest portrays the cultivating force of music enacted by prosperous magic, but the humoral conditions of individuals' characters' body in the play are not always subject to the discursive power of music. Facing their failure in responding to music, the Neapolitan characters differentiate themselves from indigenous characters by focusing on their sense of beating, which is explained in premodern medical treatises as a sign of the circulation of the blood. My analysis of the Tempest suggests that race in premodern politics of race making is a fiction. It shows that race is a fiction that has been established upon a fantasy about the human body, particularly a fantasy about certain novel qualities of the blood, which can be maintained when the blood is well circulated through the body. By writing difference on blood, the aristocratic characters in The Tempest naturalize a social hierarchy while depicting Caliban as one incapable of cultivating his behavior and religious belief despite the use of music. My debate thus complicates the relations of music and race by narrating not only theological constructions of race, but also medical constructions of race in the early modern period. So that's my discussion in this paper. Thanks.
Thank you. And we've got some virtual applause going on, lots of virtual applause. So exciting. All right. Our next presenter is Senan Sharkeje. I am so sorry. I practiced. Let's start again. Our next speaker is Senan Sharkeje from the University of California, Santa Barbara, who's going to be discussing a paper entitled When the Turk Turns, the Turks as a Mediator of Racial Difference in Othello and the Courageous Turk. Take it away, Senan.
Thank you, and thank you for organizing this beautiful event so that we learn what everyone else is doing. And can you see my slides? Yes. Okay. Okay. Now you see it as a slideshow. Okay. Cool. I'll start. Okay. Um, I never know whether to call Othello a Turk play, which is a group of plays in the early modern English drama that feature the Turk. The Turk definitely has a powerful presence in the play with the threat of the Turkish fleet, Othello's question, are we turned Turks, to Cassio Montano as they get drunk and fight, Iago's reassurance to Desdemona that his words are true or else he is a Turk, and finally with the turbaned Turk that Othello refers to at the end. However, the Turk never appears on the stage, so on the level of characters, I cannot say there's a Turk in Othello. Reading about race in Othello, I encountered analyses that looked at the religious significance of the Turk for the play. Considering the Turk is basically synonymous with Muslim in the early modern era, the religious connotations are of course relevant. Yet to me, it still does not fully explain the Turk's awkward presence and the purpose it serves for the play. The explanation came to me not in Othello itself, but in a lesser known and understudied Turk play, Thomas Goff's The Courageous Turk. Goff's play racializes the Turk beyond its religious connotations and articulates a Turkish frame that is able to exist as both black and white. Paying attention to such color conscious rhetoric and applying it to an analysis of Othello revealed the Turk's racial function in the play, which is to mediate and release the tension in the duality of Othello's identity. The Courageous Turk starts with Amurath, the Turkish king, renouncing his royal duties after he falls in love with Eumorphe. The court is not happy with Amurath's choice, and starting with his suitor Shahin, the members of the court keep trying to convince Amurath to let go of love and return to his royal duties. Shahin summarizes the situation from his perspective: no more king now, for subject Amurath. In contrast, Amurath used to be trembled at, treading down armies as if by them he meant of dead men's backs to build up stairs to heaven. Instead of leading armies in what the text implies to be holy war for the Turks, Amurath is tempted and dragged into the public view of shame. In Shahin's words, Amurath is a spectacle of laughter. Amurath's awareness of this pressure becomes apparent in his speech right before Shahin plays his final trick on him. The king laments, Turk, Amurath, slave, nay, something baser, king. For if we weigh, 'tis subjects and not kings bear all the sway. As he steps away from his royal duties, he is clearly aware of the different perceptions of the situation and the shame that surrounds it. He questions his role and the true limits of his power as a king. claiming that it is his court that will bear all the sway in his decision to renounce his crown in the name of love. To guilt and scare Amrath into killing Umarfi, Shahin dresses up as Orhanes, Amrath's father. The trick works, and Amrath's last remark before he kills Umarfi is that his state as a king is unhappy because kings must fear to love lest subjects hate. Umarfi's murder is not a stereotyping statement of Turkish manliness as it may initially seem to be. Rather, it encapsulates the ambiguity of the Turk that the first couple acts of the play construct. The Turkish court wants Amrath to perform his royal duties. Amrath, a Turkish king, wants to renounce his duties in the name of love, but is pressured into killing his lover. The play gives us a depiction of the Turk that is diverse, vulnerable, and human in its motives. The play completely erases this ambiguity after Amrath is back to being the Turkish king that his court wants him to be. Performing his Turkishness, Amrath again leads armies and arises as a clear enemy and threat to Christians. An antagonistic dynamic between the Turks and Christians become manifest in the play through the appearance of the first Christian character, Kobolitz. He ends his speech with the following words: Turk, I'll oppose thee still. Heaven has decreed that this weak hand shall make that tyrant bleed. The undertone is that this opposition is so fixed that it comes from heaven. The play affirms Koblitz's stance in the very next scene with Amrath's statement, now will I be a Turk. Amrath's affirmative and performative declaration continues with the following words: So am I Amrath, the great king of Turks. Oh, how it glads me thus to bash their brains, to rend their locks, to tear these infidels. As they quench with Christians' blood their furious thirst, the message is that it is this opposition that defines Turkishness. The emphasis on Turkishness increases with the use of compounds such as Turkish majesty, Turkish blood, and even Turkish horse, all on the same page. This increase parallels the rising action and tension of the play that centers a fight between Christians and the Turks. As this antagonism intensifies, the play starts associating the Turk with blackness. Guiding the supernatural spectacle in the show, a stage direction reads, a rise for fiends framed like Turkish kings but black. The conjunction but here suggests that the expected Turkish frame would not be black, that the blackness of the Turkish fiends is a twist, but does not say that the Turk is white. Consequently, the Turk is able to embody both in this moment of racial ambiguity. The play soon flips this around as Shahin tells Amrath, Your grace seems much distempered, beds of sweat bedew your brows with never wonted paleness. These lines follow Amrath's encounter with the fiends, so it does suggest Amrath might be scared and that it does not happen often. However, it also carries racial connotations, suggesting that being pale is not habitually seen on Amrath's, the Turkish king's face. A silent blackness of the Turk now replaces the previously silent whiteness. Consequently, Turkishness becomes involved with and removed from both, able to embody both and neither all at the same time as it fits the theatrical scene. Before looking at how this frame of the Turk clarifies the last scene of Othello, I want to establish the construction of Othello's identity in the play. Iago and Rodrigo's interactions prime the audience to see Othello through his racial identity as the Moor. They refer to Othello using phrases such as an old black ram, the devil, a lascivious Moor, a Barbary horse, and thick lips. However, the play ultimately complicates this association through the other characters' approach to Othello. Cassio surrounds the word Moor with love and worry as he looks sadly and prays the Moor be safe. With similar care and tone, later in the play, Ludovica asks, O thou Othello, that were once so good, fallen in the practice of a cursed slave, what shall be said to thee? These lines create an equation where Othello is exempt of the fallen practice of a cursed slave. It is only Iago that blames the murder on Othello's humor, attributing it to a cause physiologically inherent to Othello. The fact that Lodovico addresses him as Othello instead of Moor further reinforces the individuality and complexity of Othello, leaving no room for a misperception of racial stereotyping in his words, even after Othello's act of violence. This ambiguity is a symptom of a constant tension in Othello's double existence as the outsider Moor and a part of the Venetian order. The initial priming of the audience, with an emphasis on a biased picture of Othello's identity as the Moor, is revealed to be partial with the Duke's entry. After learning that the Turkish fleet is trying to invade Cyprus, the Duke addresses Othello to employ him. Valiant Othello, we must straight employ you against the general enemy Ottoman. Then the Duke turns to Brabantio and says, I did not see you. Welcome, gentle senior. We lacked your counsel and your help tonight. While Othello and his valiants are an integral part of Venetian military and political affairs, Brabantio is only circumstantially present in the scene. He would not be there at all if he was not looking for Othello. Furthermore, the Duke's words to Brabantio lack the urgency that those to Othello have. Brabantio reinforces the conflict between Othello's needed presence in the military scene and his anxiety over Othello's recent presence in a familial scene. After the Duke inquires about Brabantio's anxiety and whom he thinks stole his daughter, Brabantio points to Othello. Here is the man, this Moor, whom now it seems your special mandate for the state affairs hath hither brought. Othello's presence in the state and the family are completely different. In the former, his work is crucial to the safety of Venetians, but he is alienated in the family. It is Othello's association with the Turk in the scene of the suicide that releases the tension present in this duality. Here I want to remind you of the frame that the courageous Turk creates, which is that the Turk can simultaneously be white and black, reflected by the Venetian and the Moor here respectively. In the final scene of Othello, the play, Othello narrates a malignant and a turbaned Turk that beat a Venetian and traduced the state. Following this violent act, Othello explains that he took by the throat the circumcised dog and smote him thus. He kills himself exactly the way he killed the turbaned Turk, eliminating the threat that he became to the Venetian society. In this scene, Othello has already confirmed the biased expectations of him as the Moor through his violence against Desdemona. At the same time, by punishing himself the way he punished the turbaned Turk in Aleppo, he recalls his initial status, the protector of the Venetians. The double existence that kept shifting throughout the play finally crystallizes in this moment as Othello embodies both of those identities simultaneously. With the ability to move seamlessly between blackness and whiteness, the Turk enables the dual existence of Othello as the Moor and Othello as the Venetian. It first initiates the alienation of Othello's integration to the Venetian society through becoming similar to the Turkish threat. At the same time, this very alienation enables Othello to reinstate himself back to his initial status as the protector through the act of suicide. Ultimately, the Turk's unique racial status makes him the mediating agent of this dual existence by abridging and alienating these identities simultaneously. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. And we have lots of virtual applause for you. Wonderful job. All right. Our next speaker is Alyssa Adare Smith from University of Iowa, who will be giving a paper entitled Equiano's Ethos of Reclamation, Religious Joy, and Othello.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Is my volume good? Perfect. All right, well, let me just get started here. Olaudah Equiano was a Black 18th century British author, and his autobiography, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Equiano, was involved in the 18th century English fascination with William Shakespeare. Shakespeare's prominence was due in part to the English national project of making him a symbol of English exceptionalism. England's national virtue signaling via the playwright and sonneteer increased Shakespeare's appearance in print and the popularity of his plays, which meant 18th century critics tinkered with his work to fit the imaginings and attitudes of the time. It was Shakespeare's place in popular culture and his permanent place as a literary fixture that influenced Equiano's autobiography by way of Equiano fashioning himself in the way of Shakespeare's Othello. Interesting narratives, Shakespearean resonances, are not simple regurgitations of quotations from the early modern writer, but embedded motifs from Othello that orient Equiano as the titular character. In its own time, Othello ruminated on the effects of racial differences, marital and familial relationships, and the religious tension between Islam and Christianity. Equiano addressed similar themes, but he did so in a way that maintained his individuality and his political integrity, and permitted him to advantageously borrow from and revise the tragedy for his own literary goals. As a result of Equiano's revisional process, he drew cultural similarities between Africans and Europeans, strengthening his anti-slavery position. Frameworks from literary historian Stephen Greenblatt and scholar Reginald Wilburn untangle my use of self-fashioning and explicate Equiano's revisional maneuvers. Self-fashioning is drawn directly from Greenblatt's study of the development of 16th century self-identity. I also draw heavily from Wilburn and his examination of 18th and 19th century Black authors' use of English Renaissance literature. My argument relies specifically on Wilburn's use of completing and complicating. In his study of Black intertextual engagement with John Milton, Wilburn argues that when early Black writers referenced and deployed Miltonic literary tropes, they completed and complicated his canon. And I argue the same is applicable to Shakespeare's canon. As already mentioned, 18th century England was already in the process of a figurative dismemberment and dispersal of Shakespeare's work. Interesting narrative recalls Shakespeare's various disfigured forms to create an Othelian dress. I conclude my argument in Equiano's interior. To define the ways Equiano's literary agility translates into joy, I turn to literary scholar Tara Bynum and her approach to reading Black pleasure. Equiano opens an interesting narrative with an immersive look into the culture of his native country. He describes being born to one of those elder chiefs, and his lineage explains why he knows so well the judicial process performed by his nation's senators, despite being removed from his culture at a young age. Of the judgments Equiano reflects on in this first chapter, he brings distinct attention to the handling of adultery. He writes that chief men decided disputes and punished crimes, and in most cases, the law of retaliation prevailed. Adultery among his people was sometimes punished with slavery or death. The punishment was so harsh because so sacred is the honor of the marriage bed, and so jealous are they of the fidelity of their wives. While one goal of this chapter is to inform readers of Igbo culture and customs, Equiano undercuts the transmission of cultural knowledge through his positioning of adultery. Adultery is placed before marriage, insinuating that there is a greater importance on the issue of fidelity than the act of being married. Equiano's diction also suggests that he and his people may be more concerned with the preservation of sexual fidelity. Marriage bed denotes the sexual relationship of a husband and a wife, and Equiano's description of Native Africans as jealous are direct textual links that bring Equiano closer to Othello. Othello, a play known for its jealous protagonist, is about the relationship between Othello and Desdemona that becomes sour due to the deceit espoused by antagonist Iago. The despise of their relationship is partially due to the preoccupation with Othello's and Desdemona's imagined sexual relationship. Desdemona's father, Brabantio, claims to be concerned with her marriage to Othello, but the text reveals that his concern is less with their institutional union and more with their sexual encounters. Iago and Rodrigo wake Brabantio to tell him that an old black ram is tupping your white ewe. They continue instigating by claiming that your daughter is covered with a Barbary horse. Interesting narrative and Othello are both interested in elucidating what fidelity means, but as Equiano continues narrating his life, his version of fidelity has less to do with preserving marital and sexual integrity and more with demonstrating his own loyalty. Equiano's move from fidelity to loyalty is his revision of Othello. Instead of allowing Othello's meditation on fidelity to dominate the way that he approaches the theme in his narrative, he subverts fidelity and uses it to show how he has been loyal in his own life. Even when Equiano purchased his freedom from his enslaver, Robert King, King still found a way to exert his domination by saying, "We hope you won't leave us, but that you will still be with the vessels." Rather than deferring to his own newly gained free status and insisting that he leave, Equiano claimed to struggle between inclination and duty and agreed to enter on board as an able-bodied sailor. While the assumption may be to presume that Equiano was affected by the intimidation that comes along with King's position as an enslaver, Equiano's diction reveals that his loyalty points to at least a fragmented agency. Since he is exercising agency, the best definition of duty is a definition that suggests Equiano chose to do what was morally right. Drawing on the values of fidelity created a shared experience and language between Native Africans and Europeans, despite falsehoods perpetuated by institutions to justify slavery. In his book, Slavery and Culture, Simon Gikandi claims that there are both visible and invisible connections of two separate social realms. Equiano's shift from fidelity and judgment to his demonstrations of loyalty show that the two groups, Africans and Europeans, share a culture of taste. In a longer version of this article, I continue my argument that Equiano continues to borrow from and revise Shakespeare's Othello by using his spiritual conversion to resolve the religious tension of Othello, and I use Ian Smith's recovered biblical allusion in the play as a jumping off point for this argument. Smith brings readers to Othello's biblical allusion to the Garden of Gethsemane that parallels Othello's encounter with Barbanzio's lynch mob to the betrayal of Jesus in the garden. The brief allusion subverts and undercuts Black racial stereotypes at the time. Since Othello is a Black Moor, his immigrant status, race, and suspected religious affiliation served as an ever-present threat to the English Protestant state. By presenting Othello as a Christ-like figure, Shakespeare challenged audiences' implicit biases and created tension between Othello's perceived religious identity and what he actually practiced. The play's issues with Othello's religious identity remain unresolved. But I argue since Equiano decided to fashion himself as Othello, his conversion to Christianity could potentially serve to resolve the thematic tension and give Othello an opportunity for redemption and atonement by bringing the character even closer to Christ. While it may be possible to assess interesting narrative for the specific ways Equiano exhibits joy, what I argue as the more productive claim is that Equiano's countless literary maneuvers require reading for Black pleasure. In her book Reading Pleasures, literary scholar Tara Bynum looks for those good feelings that are neither governed nor legislated: joy, excitement, and enthusiasm. She is correct in looking for joys present in Black writing and living, and her assessments of joy require readers to be called inward. Readers experience what's read as bodily. Equiano's advanced literacy necessitates Bynum summoned for active reading. To be a good reader of interesting narrative, one must be active and ready to experience the text through all senses. Whether Equiano brought readers into the belly of the ship or onto an imagined stage to experience his Othello, readers had to be ready to go through all of the various moves Equiano made to tell his story. Equiano completed and complicated Shakespeare's canon by using his life as revision, and when Othello fell short, Equiano's own life made up for what Othello could not do, and his revised character encouraged readers to see a new Blackened Othello. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that talk. We have applause and hearts, which I think is akin to joy being expressed in our virtual space. Wonderful. All right. And now we will have our last panelist of the day, but certainly not the least. We have Jared Nabhan from Columbia University, who's going to talk about colonialism and race in Marlowe's Dido. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Awesome. So let me share my screen. Are you guys able to see the presentation?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Awesome. All right. So first, thank you for the Newberry College for having us all here. As you heard, my name is Jared Nabhan, and today we will discuss Christopher Marlowe's tragedy Dido, Queen of Carthage, and the positive alterations he affords to the character Iarbas. Marlowe alters the Virgilian epic and Ovid's retelling of the Carthage story to give more consideration to the Berber king Iarbas. Though traditionally relegated to the background of the story, I argue that Marlowe gives Iarbas a more prominent role in Dido to critique the colonial conquests of his countrymen. By reimagining the African king's relationship with Dido and her sister Anna, Marlowe compels his audience to find sympathy for Iarbas and his people. This introduces an alternative viewpoint, with Dido as a colonizer and Iarbas in Africa as casualties to her force. Iarbas is referred to as the Numidian king, Gaetulian king, or the Berber king. The Berbers were a nomadic tribe who settled in northern Africa in 2000 BC. H.T. Riley notes that in its widest sense, the region of Gaetulia included the inhabitants of Mauritania, Numidia, Cyrene, and the Great Desert. We can consider this a representation of his domain. On the contemporary scholarship, those who apply a colonialist lens agree that Aeneas embodies a colonialist force that exploits Dido and her people so he can settle in his destined Latium. And with this, I have no quarrel. But I would like to explore the possibility of Dido also engaging in the archetypal processes of English Renaissance colonialism as found in the quote from Lisa Hopkins. And I'll just name them off. The self-justification and sense of divine mission, the involvement with and subsequent desertion of a native woman, and the eventual eruption of violence. And I plan to show that Dido follows this process. Other contemporary scholarship comments on Marlowe's interest in his international pursuits. Perhaps some of these geopolitical ambitions of his countrymen include Richard Hakluyt's Principal Navigations, a collection of colonial journal entries. In volume 11, we find Edmund Hogan and Thomas Tukeli recorded their expedition within northern Africa, specifically the Berber region. Hogan recounts founding a diplomacy with King Abdelmelek, a Berber leader who was rather receptive to English culture. Nevertheless, Hogan takes advantage of the Berbers' lack of trade experience, and unsurprisingly, just 1 year later, Stukeli recounts engaging in a war against the Berber natives who resisted their presence. Such was commonplace in these records. And Marlowe's play does not shy from depicting the strenuous relationship between Africa and Europe. To closely resemble the colonization of Africa in the 16th century, Marlowe pacifies Iarbas and radically changes the traditional founding of Carthage. First, through Anna, we are introduced to a likable Iarbas who poses no threat to Carthage. Historically, Virgil presents Anna as a relatively minor character who advises Dido, whereas Ovid's Fasti narrates her involvement in Carthage before and after the departure of Aeneas. The classical version of Anna expresses fear and animosity towards Iarbas, who sacks Carthage after Dido's death. Though Iarbas is usually associated with barbarism and violence, in Marlowe's play, Anna loves the king, and she serves as almost a static character, existing to confirm the passivity of Iarbas. For example, in Act 3, Scene 1, after Dido orders Iarbas out of Carthage, Anna longs for the king. Oh, that Iarbas could but fancy me. Additionally, when Iarbas becomes grief-stricken upon hearing of the union between Aeneas and Dido, Anna supports him instead of her own sister. Away with Dido, Anna be thy song, Anna that doth admire thee more than heaven. And Anna's suicide at the death of Iarbas is a blatant comparison to Dido's suicide for Aeneas, which adds to this unprecedented reverence Marlowe gives to the king. Anna's treatment of Iarbas signals to Marlowe's audience, who surely noticed this change of heart, that Iarbas deserves a defense. He does not play the villain, but instead an honorable man worth dying for. Now let's talk about Dido and Iarbas. Marlowe undermines his audience's preconceived identities of these characters by reconfiguring the circumstances under which the Carthaginian land was gained. Traditionally, after being ousted from Tyre by her brother Pygmalion, Dido and her refugee nation meet Iarbas, who offers her an insultingly small portion of land. Virgil records that Dido cleverly built her city by outwitting Iarbas. He offered her as much land as an ox hide would cover, and she cut it up into thin strips and laid it so that it enclosed enough space for Carthage. And all ensuing interpretations perpetuate Dido as a cunning queen who outsmarts the Berber king. And these stories make it easy to find fault with Iarbas, for he tries to take advantage of a weak nation only to fall victim to his hubris. Far from being a mere transaction, this act stands as a symbol of his overreaching ambition, which authors have attached to the character for centuries. So how does Marlowe detach this prejudice from Iarbas? Well, Virgil's Iarbas says he gave coastland in terms of tenure, showing a one-sided transaction, while Marlowe's with whom we did divide both laws and land implies cooperation between parties. Dido exposing a loophole in terms that are imposed on her drastically differs from her ignoring agreed-upon terms. And if we believe Iarbas, the terms of the trade are simple. Iarbas will supply land, and Tyrians and Africans must divide the laws. This, too, differs from Virgil's Carthage, which, quote, chose laws and magistrates. Since Marlowe omits the king's disingenuous proposal and subsequently Dido's trickery, he creates a generous or perhaps naive king who believes that the Tyrians will conform to African laws. Iarbas is a striking reflection of King Abdelmelek, who aided the colonist, and even enjoyed the mixing of cultures, only to be taken advantage of by those whom he helped. Royal African marriage rights become a topic of debate as Dido refuses to marry Iarbas, who firmly believes that these marriage rights were included in their argument. Here we have our involvement with not a native woman, but a native man. Dido is courted by kings from places such as Greece, Persia, Sparta, and Thessaly. Royal they may be, none from Africa appear. Marlowe does away with the, quote, other lords whom the African land, rich in triumphs, rears, who were slighted in the Aeneid, effectively isolating Iarbas in terms of native suitors claiming these African marriage rights. Nevertheless, Dido appeals to the European spousal rights between her and Aeneas. Iarbas is not only losing land, but without the marital alliance, he and his people have gained a contending power within Africa. The marriage between Trojan and Carthaginian royalty endangers his authority in Africa and negates the natives' ability to govern themselves. Despite the betrayal and looming political threats, Iarbas does not encroach on the people of Carthage, unlike his Ovidian counterpart. On the contrary, Dido's political tactics are the ones that are tyrannical. Let us look now at the first quote. Within her plea to Aeneas to stay as her husband, we find that Dido's colonialist indifference for Africa manifests through her disregard of indigenous life. She views the natives as nothing but political commodities whose freedom is at her command. And when questioned by Anna about possible dissension for naming Aeneas king of Libya, she replies with the longer quote you now see. In short, Dido heightens herself to the status of goddess, declares goddess-like control over the elements, and she threatens to murder both her own people and the natives of Africa. This is the self-justification and sense of divine mission. See, Virgil's Dido claimed that the Libyan tribes and Numidian chiefs hate me, yet Marlowe's Iarbas clearly wishes no ill upon Dido or Carthage. And in Dido's final moments, we find our subsequent desertion of a native man as she sends Iarbas away with the false hope of love and proceeds to kill herself. Rather than pouncing on this opportunity and sacking Carthage as in Heroides, Iarbas cannot stand the heartbreak from the loss of Dido and succumbs to his sorrow. Interestingly, Anna echoes the king's last words, almost as if affirming that these are the words of real love and not from a lustful suitor, as he was characterized in other versions. Not to mention, with Gaetulia absent of its king, Marlowe's fictional Africa enters a state of political disarray, not unlike the African nations that suffered when two contending colonialist forces entered their realm. By tripling the number of suicides usually associated with the story, Marlowe certainly gives us our eventual eruption of violence. The prerequisites have been met, and Dido, in the play of that name, joins Aeneas as a second colonial aggressor. Marlowe converts Dido, a once cunning queen for whom Augustine wept, into a brutal tyrant, and this transfiguration certainly stood out to his audience. With Dido embodying a European colonizer, Marlowe begs his audience to question their nation's pursuits, for who would weep for this Dido? As for Iarbas, for upwards of 1,000 years, the king has been a tyrant, barbarian, and a resentful suitor. Marlowe gives honor to the character. He is tricked rather than outsmarted. He returns malice with compassion, and his unfortunate death compels his audience to view Iarbas and Africa, not Dido, as the victim of this play. Thank you.
Thank you for that important talk. We are now, yes, virtual applause. I always think it's important to note that since we're in a virtual space and perhaps everyone cannot see it. Yes, we are now going to begin our Q&A. We want to open it up to our conference participants as well as attendees. So feel free to ask a question in the Q&A function, or you can drop a question into the chat. I also want to encourage our panelists to ask each other questions and be in dialogue with each other. All right, well, I can start us off since, people might still be really trying to take in everything that you talked about, each of you, during this panel. It was a lot and really thought-provoking. I'm thrilled that we have another performance panel that's thinking about and beyond Shakespeare. I would love if you could each discuss the affordances of exploring the canonical and non-canonical playwrights and how they're depicting race on the pre-modern stage.
I can try to start an answer. I, at least thinking about Shakespeare and Thomas Goff, Othello is, um, I think more of a court play, like performed in court, at least at some point. But Goff's is a university play, and I'm thinking about how would they um question these things differently, because even today, like university allows like a different context, allows room for asking questions differently or thinking about things differently. And I'm also thinking about, I don't have an answer to this, but one question I'm thinking about in the future is staging, like the staging technology. And that would look very different in a more funded foreplay versus a university play where it could maybe be more experimental. And I think looking at the less explored, and possibly less funded and possibly more experimental plays such as Thomas Goff's, the Courageous Turk University play or other plays that I can't think of right now, um, shows it can show the other ways that the society and the culture thought about and explored race that doesn't necessarily always show up in the canon, which again, like it's the dynamic we see today too. There's a difference between the mainstream like discussion of race versus how people actually experience race in more experimental, less exposed contexts. So I think both have their pros and cons, but it's important to put them in conversation.
And I think it's important you mentioned also like the funding aspect, in terms of whether plays get staged. Ostensibly, you have to have money to stage these productions. And people tend to fund Shakespeare more because he has I guess we could say he has a wider appeal, but it's because he's everywhere. So then he multiplies even more, right? We're not seeing him maybe as much as Marlowe, which I have several friends who are like, love Marlowe's work. And he's, always, I don't want to say like second string, but, Marlowe's still pretty up there. He gets a lot of attention, but still not Shakespeare, right? And then we have Equiano. So it's like thinking about what gets funded, right? What types of plays get funded? Are more diverse plays from playwrights that are they themselves, like people of color, getting the same amount of money, that a Shakespeare play is, because, his plays are well endowed, and you have like the Globe and then the Old Globe in San Diego. So yeah, it's really interesting, and I'd love to hear from the rest of our panelists, like your thoughts on this.
Um, I guess like when I was working on my paper, something that I'm interested in my research broadly is just sort of like collapsing temporal approaches when thinking about disparate sort of like literary periods. And so it was really interesting just to like take a step back from like the 18th century Atlantic world and go back to sort of like um, those early modern and pre-modern stagings and trying to see, how lineages of performance have survived or fallen off across time. And so something that Ian Smith brought out about, pre-modern performances is that, that early modern audience would have been well aware of that sort of biblical allusion, seeing Othello come out on stage for the very first time, being maybe not welcome, but being thrust into like this sort of lynch mob type introduction, they would have been well aware and made that connection to the Garden of Gethsemane, and making that link between this Black character showing up as this sort of like Christ-like figure. And part of my argument is that a Atlantic world, an 18th century audience, especially an audience who is as well versed biblically as like Equiano, also would have, read Othello or watched Othello on stage and been well aware of that biblical allusion and have been able to make those connections, which, I argue likely drew Equiano even closer to Othello and closer to that characterization, and really just saw the figure as someone that was malleable and someone who he could like dress himself as, just to further stretch his audience and stretch his reach for his narrative.
Yeah, Alyssa, your work, talking about Equiano and the way that he was inspired by, speaking back to, and also moving away from Othello, I think is so powerful because we know that Othello is often, when we're thinking about characters of color in Shakespeare, Othello is usually the one who's brought up. And I know you're probably familiar with Vanessa Cordera's work, who thinks about all of the different afterlives of Othello. And it's interesting to think too about how Othello continues to appear, whether it's like a sketch comedy or, in what kinds of like manifestations this and the hold that it has, right? Because many PCRS scholars, including, excuse me, David Sterling Brown, encourage us to think about like, what about the other race plays, other Shakespeare race plays that aren't just Othello? And so when we think about those adaptations, what you've shown is that Equiano is doing something that's really quite unique, especially because, you know, there's that idea of joy, which I think is so important as you've like rightly stated, looking for joy in Black life and writing. That's something that I hope we, as PCRS scholars, as we're looking to the past and thinking about how, you know, pre-modern people are racialized, that we're not only looking at these moments of horror, which are real and we should talk about, but that we're also thinking about the fullness of the lives that they lived and how that includes, love and joy and laughter. So I really appreciated your talk. And I also want to allow Eugene and Jared to respond if you have a response.
Yeah, so for me, this is far outside of my ordinary research. I usually study Milton and his theology, so this was a great chance to expand my research and get into other fields. Marlowe is definitely an interesting character to allow me to do that. If you know anything about Marlowe, he's kind of out there in terms of his writing and his personal life, certainly. Uh, but it was good to take a look at the sources, the Virgil, right, the Aeneid and Ovid's works as well, but also even a couple Italian versions of the Carthage story that I read. It's interesting to see the evolution of not only Iarbas and Africa throughout time, but also with Dido and whether she considers herself a stranger, as she did in the in Virgil's account, and throughout time that strangeness kind of disappears from her language, which was an interesting thing to notice as well. But for me, the interesting thing was that you may have noticed that there was like one picture of Iarbas in my presentation, and that was because there aren't any images of Iarbas that are before, I think it's like 1700s, and before that he loses all of the African features that are described in the Aeneid and in Ovid's Fastes, and I thought it would be inappropriate to put that up there. I do have them though, but as far as Marlowe's play, the race of Iarbas is up for debate. He's called a Moor, but as we saw in Amber's presentation earlier with the playing cards, that demonstrates how Europeans saw African as black, despite the pigments, the various pigments of the people in Africa. Specifically, the Numidii, the Libya, and the Mauritani cards that were in her collection. If anybody looked through that, demonstrate that those that region is still considered black. So I think that his audience would make that connection. The closest we get to in the tragedy of Dido is talking on skin colors when Aeneas tells Dido that, quote, "Wert thou ugly black, Aeneas could not choose but hold thee dear," which to me is saying, even if you were a true native of Africa, I would hold thee dear because, again, Dido calls herself a stranger in this, uh, and I believe that's set in front of Iarbas as well. So I think going through that just helped me kind of branch out of the Milton studies. I hope that answered it.
Oh, yeah, so I'm still thinking about how like the canonical and non-canonical work depict race differently on pre-modern stage, but I'm still thinking about my thought about that. But I if just for now, what I can think about is actually the relations of the premodern canonical work like Shakespeare's play and contemporary popular culture, such as like early broadside printings that were circulated along the public and then the people. Um, that's if we can call like that as part of like non-canonical culture in early modern period, then I can also think about that. But I think that, for example, Shakespeare's play like The Tempest were actually meant to be performed rather to be read. And there were many connotations that actually shows how Shakespeare employed contemporary popular music within the play. So, for example, there are like lyrics of Ariel's song, which says like, shake off slumber and be awakened. And actually, that lyric is from contemporary popular ballad, which emphasizes contemporary like Christian morality, that emphasizes that all English people should be a really good Christian and achieve redemption. And those who are not um, making that kind of achievement cannot be conceived as like the true English people. I think that the sound of Shakespeare's play, like The Tempest, are actually constructing the concepts of race in early modern audiences' mind by performing sound and music, because it could make the early modern audience recall the sounds of the contemporary ballad that were circulated in early modern England. So I think that the early modern politics of race making were is or it was actually a phenomenon that was happened by the performance of canonical work in early modern stage and the contemporary popular culture. That's just what I thought, but I'm still thinking about how like race was depicted in non-canonical work. Yeah.
Thank you for your thoughtful responses. I want to open it up to allow any of our fellow panelists, if you would like to raise your hand and ask a question, and you can unmute, or if you want to drop it in the chat, we can read it out for you. And I also want to encourage our panelists to be in dialogue with each other, because like earlier, Jared, you were talking about the racial ambiguity of Moors, right? And that's something Senan's thinking about with like the Turks and how oftentimes North Africans and Black people are conflated. It's just this category, and we are trying to figure out who who these early modern writers are actually talking about, since there's that conflation. Of course, Umberine Dedeboy writes about this a lot. So I'd love to give you an opportunity to chat about that a little more, and then I will pass it on over to Amber, who has her hand raised.
So I had a question for any of the fellow panelists. We all know that we had a big paper. We had to make a lot of cuts to fit it into that 10 minutes, right? So I was just curious, what was something that you wanted to talk about, but quite didn't have enough time, quite didn't make the cut? I know that's kind of broad, but.
In the fuller version of my article, I did talk a lot about 18th century performances of Othello, and I found this really sort of like cool pattern between four famous actors in 18th century England: James Quinn, David Garrick, Springer Berry, and Philip Kimball, and they sort of like reveal like this pattern of depictions of Othello that oscillate between sort of like depicting Othello as a sort of like British figure, like he is English, he is British, he is stately, he is formal, professional, just very much, I feel like trying to shape Othello into the broader sort of like Shakespearean image at the time as just like this highly regarded figure. And then, of course, the other side of the spectrum is the exaggerated, the caricature, and the exploited foreigner version of Othello. And it was just really interesting, sort of like tracking those performances, how we start really stately, then we wane into caricature with Garrick and with Springer, and then it comes back to being stately again at the very end of the century. So that was just like really interesting. And then I, of course, had lots of close reading that I didn't get to, but I was really interested in the ways that Equiano also drew on Othello and revised Othello, thinking about like familial relationships. And so very briefly, Othello talks about his mother when referencing the handkerchief. And I always found that like really interesting in the play, how um Othello almost seems to like fall victim to or fall into the trap of like mythologizing or making, this sort of like African figure, this African woman figure, very like mystic and magical. And it's like, oh no, like he's like, like perpetuating these very obvious and like wrong racial stereotypes. And, in my paper, I sort of argue that Equiano too, thinks about his own relationship with his mother, but he is very careful to not fall into that same trap of just like perpetuating those harmful stereotypes, and actually builds out for us a very unified, like Black family unit. And so, yeah, just drawing on those, similarities that I found from the play and the narrative.
I can talk about it a little bit. For me, I had to in the full paper, I'm not just looking at the last scene of Othello. It's just it's a peak moment of that conflation. But the like conflation of blackness and whiteness in Othello is not specific to that scene or even Othello as a character. And I'm also looking at how Iago, it happens in relation to Iago as well. So, for example, Othello's murder of Desdemona, his uxoricide, is considered turning Turk, but Iago also kills his wife, Milia. So, like, is Iago also a Turk? And then the scene where he goes, I'm not lying, or else I'm a Turk. Not the exact words, except, or else I am a Turk. He is lying in that moment to Desdemona. So, like, has he turned Turk in that moment? And he is confessing it in a way. And I'm like looking more into those details of how the Turk come. Oh, and then Othello's question: are we turned Turks to Cassio Montano because they're fighting each other, getting drunk, and all that? And the answer is yes. They are fighting, like they are doing what Othello imagines Turks would be doing. So, like, what's happening at that moment? I'm like looking at those details. A little bit more, and also doing a broader reading on Goth against the grain, because usually it's perceived as a display of Turkish manliness, like that murder of Eumorphi, etc., or a more traditional masculinity. And I'm like talking about how that's not necessarily the case in all of the play.
In my case, I actually didn't put like the case studies in my in the portion that I presented, but in another parts of my paper, I did case study, which is about Prospero and Caliban, and basically what I want to explain was how music actually forms contemporary, like early modern conception of race. Not and then music is I part of my argument is that music is really special because it engaged with pre-modern race making, but it's not about it's more than just a discourse of the skin color or epidermal, but it's more about the materiality of the body and phenomenon, and um, I try to discuss how it's related with early modern discourse of the blood and humor. So I try to show how music was related with early modern conceptions of difference that was rising at the time period.
Thank you all. And now I want to give Amber a chance to ask her question. Thank you for your patience, Amber. Go ahead.
Thank you everyone for those talks, and I'm really glad, Jared, that you managed to engage with the cards and find them useful for you as well. My question is actually for Yujin. I found your talk really interesting, and I hadn't even thought of anything like that before, like music and race making, so it was really inspiring for me. And I was wondering if you work with any other sources than just drama and plays, and if so, what other kinds of sources? And I was wondering if you're engaging with the idea of kind of early modern soundscapes and how early modern soundscapes and racialization play a part together in race making. So yeah, that was my question, just because soundscapes really interest me. I don't work on them, but I kind of wish I did. So I'm just very curious. Thanks so much.
Okay, so okay, thanks so much for your question. Yeah, so I actually part of my argument was about early modern broadside ballad. And I tried to explain how in my paper, I tried to show how contemporary broadside ballad, like early modern audience oral experiences of contemporary broadside ballad could make them conceive Caliban as the racial and religious other, because Caliban was not reacting properly to Ariel's music, which was performed to discipline him. And then, so he's like, he says, this kind of noise and sound and sweet airs, it makes me feel delight rather than, but he is not really responding to Ariel's disciplinary and educational purpose of music. And then my part of my argument was that contemporary oral experience of broadside ballad strengthened the otherizations of Caliban when early modern audience hears Shakespeare's the performance of Shakespeare's Tempest, because there are many ballads which depicts the topic of awakeness, like to make the English people true Christian. And it also has some kind of implication that those who are, so there are like many like broadside ballad which has the woodcut imprint of the bellman's like beating the bell. And then the early modern people has some kind of conception that those who are not reacting to bellman's beating the bell were not true Christian, and those cannot be redempted. And their self-improvement were foreclosed because they are not reacting properly to music. And actually, Ariel within the play, Ariel is actually reacting like a bellman because he's actually beating his tabor throughout the play. But actually, Caliban is not reacting orally properly to Ariel's music. So part of my argument was that the contemporary oral experience of broadside ballad augments Caliban's otherness. And that kind of otherness is what could be is what was established by early modern audiences' oral experience of the performance of Shakespeare's The Tempest. So that's one example that I can think about. I am also trying to examine like musical and educational treatises, and that's what I'm currently working on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for the questions and the responses. I want to once again offer our panelists a virtual round of applause for sharing their work with us. It was really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to hear where your projects go. If you're going to go back to Milton, Jared, or you're going to stick with Marlowe for a bit, seeing on how you're continuing to theorize. Alyssa, I'm already like, I need to read Equiano. I feel inspired. And Yujin, I just feel like we should have been playing music while you were talking, just to have that ethereal, just to like, elevate it just a little bit. So thank you all so, so much. I'm going to turn it over to Leah, who's going to uh, begin with our concluding remarks and discussion.
Thank you so much, Yasmine. And I just want to make clear too that we have set aside an hour for our concluding remarks, but we don't anticipate this taking an hour. I know we are all a bit fried after this intense 2 days, and we're so grateful for your inspiring participation. And it's just been a thrill to learn from you all. I'm really happy to see we still have so many participants with us. And so we are just using this space as a time for reflection, to think about what we've covered a little bit, but also where we can go. I know Yasmine has some questions that we've devised that could start us off with a discussion. So I'll turn it back over to Yasmine to lead with those.
I was trying to get like a brief break to like get
Sorry.
some water. It's okay. It's okay. Well, before I like prompt with our questions, I really just wanted to open it up to everyone who's here. If you have like thoughts now, it's the end of as Leah said, a very like event-filled, jam-packed 2 days of hearing people's research, of gaining new perspectives about race and race making in the pre-modern field, and even pushing forward a bit, which is exciting, thinking about performance, thinking about text, playing cards, thinking about museum spaces and art. And there was just so much going on. So we really just wanted to create this space. This is reminding me of the holding space from Wicked, a little bit, if anyone's tuned into pop culture, although not quite the same. We really just want to give everyone some time to reflect and chat. Maybe there are things you didn't get to say to each other. And I see we already have hands up. Ronique, go ahead.
I think Amber was before me, so I'll let her go.
Oh, sorry, you popped up first on my screen. I apologize. Amber, go ahead.
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I had a question right from the beginning, and it's the image you used on the poster. I was wondering if whoever chose that image could tell me why they chose it and tell me a little bit more about the image. Sorry, as a visual historian, I can't ignore the fact that we've not mentioned the picture yet, so I was just curious.
I can jump in here, but I mean, I think Yasmine and I talked about it at length, right?
It was a collaboration, but Leah's
Yeah.
our art historian, so I'll let you speak more about the process.
So it's from Bulwer's Anthropometamorphosis, which I always have trouble saying, which is this really intriguing book from late 16th, early 17th century England, which is essentially about representing the body, deformities, as well as markings on the body. And it also features prominently on the cover of Kim Hall's, oh my God, I'm forgetting the title. Matt, help me out here. I'm fried. Her important book. Anyhow, Kim Hall's book. And it's not a book that has been studied in great depth by art historians or people in general. And so it was sort of a provocation. Yes, Things of Darkness. Thank you. My God, this is after 2 days. So I think we put it there kind of as a provocation. And it's interesting. I should give a shout out to Hannah Whipke, who's at University of Minnesota, who was hoping to drop in, who's writing a chapter of her dissertation. She's an art historian working on the book. So people are studying it now. It's good. There's so much. It's a very rich, complicated text. And our Newbery edition, this is also a call, like, come to the Newbery, see our books, is full of marginalia and a lot of interesting texts. So it's something you should all check out when you come, but it's a common book. You'll find it in most rare book collections. So
yeah, I was just going to quickly add, which Leah jumped onto, one of the benefits of having done a postdoc, and for everyone who's still working at the Newbery, about being at the Newbery is choosing images that are in the actual collection. So that was quite fun. And yeah, I just want to remind everybody that the Newbery has such rich sources, especially in pre-modern critical race studies. There's so much work still to be done. There's so much archival materials that haven't been worked on yet, when people are talking about topics and what should I do my research on, or what should my next project be? There is so much. It was so hard to leave the Newberry. Obviously, I had to because my postdoc was over, but um, would have stayed for the archive and CRS.
Thank you.
Ronique, do you want to go ahead?
I just want to do one more promotion before I forget, is that our short-term fellowships are due in early January. I'll put this information in the chat, but just as we're promoting our collection, keep in mind that you should apply for a fellowship because you all have something relevant to our collection to study. So I'll put that info in the chat. Go ahead, Ronique. Sorry.
No problem. I just had like kind of like an overall comment as I've watched all of these like great presentations over the past 2 days. And I was thinking a lot about Catherine Walsh's Decolonial 4, where she's talking about the thinking with rather than thinking about. And I've just found that like a lot of well, all of our work has really encapsulated that greatly. And like, I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that, but I just found like we all exemplified that greatly. And I just wanted to put that in there or put that out there. So
Yes, we had emoji responses to that. I want to open the floor so any of our other participants can respond to Ronique or share something else that they have in mind.
I actually do have a response. I'm not I don't know the context you referred to, but when it comes to thinking about and thinking with, I remember a question asked to one of the panels yesterday, which was about I think it was the pedagogy panel, and I think Yasmine, you asked it. It was about our role as international students, for international students who are teaching in the classroom. How does our own international student identity impact the classroom and our experience of or teaching of race in the classroom? But I'm also thinking about that not just in the classroom, but in relation to how I'm seeing race. And I think that's becoming more a trend in academia as well, not like disregarding our own identities, but thinking with our own racial experiences. And that's actually where my research question came from. It came from my experience of Turkishness in a US context today, because even today it's like this in between identity. Like technically, legally, Turks are considered, well, Turkish people are considered white, and then you come to the US and you don't live as practically like white, existence. You don't have that. So I was grappling with my own identity in the real world, and then I was reading the texts and I was like, oh, it's not just me, it's like present in the Renaissance as well. So when you say thinking with rather than just thinking about, that's what I think of and observe in academia today as well.
Speaking of identities, I just want to say I'm a fellow Guyanese. I'm Moroccan and Guyanese. So when you were talking about your identity, Ronique, I was like, I have to tell my mom, because anytime I encounter a Guyanese academic, she's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And who's this person? And they're representing our culture. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to put a little plug there and say, I feel that camaraderie, feel that like Guyanese energy. Gotta represent.
thank you for sharing. It's like it's very like surprising to hear or see another Guyanese person within these spaces. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Also, who knows where Guyana is?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Elisa, I see you have your hand up. Feel free to unmute and share with us all.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you because it's been amazing. The last 2 days, you guys have created such a safe space for everybody, and I've just felt really comfortable. And the dialogue has been incredible. And sometimes it can be difficult to be online and far away as well, but it's been wonderful. And so I just wanted to say thank you for creating such a wonderful space. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I know Leah can attest to this in so many of the conversations we had when we were thinking about, our Seeing Race Before Race project, where it's going to go, and how we can support scholars doing this work. we really thought a lot about obviously emerging scholars, but also international scholars. And that's something Noemi is really, passionate about too. So I hope you will all let other fellow international scholars know that, the Newberry is a great place to get connected. We hope these conversations will continue. It's not just like a one and done virtual symposium. We really want to create community, and we have the technology to do that, right, with Zoom. So we want to keep everyone in conversation and hear how your projects are going and stuff. So one of our big questions that we want to propose to you all is what's next? Like, where do we go from here? And that could be, with this community that we've created. And it could also be generally with the field, with PCRS. Like, what's next? Where do we go from here? So I just want to leave that question for you all.
And maybe another way of putting it would be, what is most useful for you? Like, what do you need as a scholar in this field, as a early career scholar, or, based on where you are and what you're studying? I know we've heard some frustrations with art historians, which I can relate to. So yeah, looks like Drew has a response.
Well, no, I mean, I was thinking about this throughout the conference, because one of the like problems is that we have a kind of we have a kind of like limited terminal, like we have an understanding of what PCRS is, and you had mentioned, Professor Markey, that part of it is this is the activism quality of it, right? And that is certainly very important, and there's not sort of diminishing that. But surely there can also be a version of PCRS and CRS that is actually not activist driven, right? Like, I don't necessarily consider myself an activist scholar. I mean, I use autoethnography, I use all sorts of tools that might be considered activist scholarship, but I don't consider myself necessarily one. What does that look like? What does it mean to like go back into the archive and say, and I mentioned this in a previous question, this racist guy was saying, this sort of old white racist scholar was saying some problematic things, but in fact was also getting at something of like a historical reality, right? And taking that and working with it, taking that and reframing it within like a new context for critical race studies. I think that's like really important because, yes, there's a whole bunch of problematic scholarship that from the 18th century, 19th century, but it's also incredibly foundational for our fields, like incredibly foundational. We couldn't do Islamic art without Cresswell. We just couldn't, right? And, he was a jaunty, gallivanting, well-to-do, Englishman. So I don't know. That's sort of diffuse, but have at it.
I think that's a really important point. We don't want to do away with this past scholarship and nor put it down in any way necessarily. I mean, I think we want to build upon it and point out where there might be some problems. I think that's okay to do, but just show that there are new directions to go, but definitely not, negate the past in any way, right? So, but we have more. Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm also a little bit fried by the end of this, but I think just piggybacking on what everyone has just said, and thanking you guys for putting together the space to talk about all of these issues. For me, the what next is really about listening to different disciplines and listening to different perspectives from across the world, like the international perspective that Yasmine was pointing to, and what I think Laura's presentation about the different museum spaces really, really highlights in an interesting way in what she said about how when you go into a space in a different place, sometimes like people just shut down and they just won't even have the conversation. And I imagine that there's something to be learned, even if we don't agree with the way that other people have thought about things. probably on both sides. So I think like the what next for me is trying to keep having those conversations, I guess, and just keep figuring out ways to use them to get to a better understanding of what was going on. Whether it's like Drew was just saying with like conversations with the past or with across different like boundaries nationally or across different disciplines. Because it's been really exciting to see so many different presentations from art history, which I don't usually get to engage with, as well as like the different language backgrounds and things. So for me, that's the next, I guess.
I do have to say, I love that we have like a solid crew of art historians. I'm literary scholar, but I think about popular images of the Tudors and Queens, and like, you know, when I start to talk about like race and stuff like that, or in like in a portrait, and they're like, "Well, she's clearly white. There's no conversation about race to be had," and I'm like, "Oh my!" I remember, you know, chatting with Leah at the Newberry, being like, "Oh my gosh, like, what do you mean we can't talk about race?" And she was like, "You know, the field." We've got to like push it forward. And, you know, I just want to acknowledge like Leah's doing a lot of that work. And it's been really exciting to see it, and so exciting to have art historians here, you know, in different fields, and, you know, thinking about how um, fish skin. I'm thinking about Lisa Butler, like, you know, just thinking of putting it all together, right? So, yes, we're talking about race in the pre-modern period, but also thinking about how race changes across time and the visual arts. And I'm just so excited by people who are engaging in work with the visual arts. So thank you all.
And also sound. I couldn't put together a thoughtful question for the last panel for that at the end of the day, but the thinking about soundscapes and how that augments like Caliban's portrayal, for instance, in the last panel, I think is really fascinating too. I really appreciate all of the different angles we've gotten.
Alyssa, you have your hand up.
I guess I would also just like take this opportunity to maybe just like throw out a little SOS, like some help, because I'm preparing to move into like the dissertation stage of my degree, and I am trying to think really, really hard about this one chapter that I want to do that tries to visualize like the economic and like trading infrastructure of the Atlantic, the 18th century Atlantic. And I'm specifically honing in on this one slaving ship that was actually named the Othello. There are actually a couple of Othellos that traverse the Atlantic. And I'm just like really interested in, I don't know, just thinking about like maybe methods or even like places to go to sort of like think about and maybe even try to find visual like representations or just like locate some like material ephemera, some type of like material culture to really like shape out and paint a picture of like what this slaving vessel would have looked like, and what are the implications of like naming a slaving ship Othello, having multiple Othellos go across the Atlantic, into the Caribbean, to the American colonies, and just different things like that. So I'm also a literary scholar. I don't know much about art, but I do like going to museums and looking at the pictures. But yeah, that's just sort of like, yeah, maybe someone has something.
Ronique has a comment. Amber has a comment. I have one too. We're all here to help. This is such a great topic. I'll probably email you later too, because it's really juicy.
You should look at the work of Cheryl Finley. Like she published the first monograph per se, specifically investigating the layout of the slave ships. She's an art historian and writer. I believe she's a professor at Cornell University, and I think she's in Atlanta right now as a curator for their art center there. But her work is like spectacular in the realm of like the visual depictions of slave ships within art. So key resource right there. And I know she'll have other bibliographic references as well in terms of that. So she's a great starting point, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem.
That sounds really interesting, Ronique. I was gonna say and like ask for everybody, but I know that there was that document made in the Google Docs where we could drop references. I hope you can put it there because I've not managed to scribble it down now. So what everyone has been referencing, I really hope that people use it. I'm saying that and I haven't used it yet myself, but I think it actually could be a really great thing for us to continue to use and to be in dialogue with each other about what our references are. So because I'd really like to follow that up. Otherwise,
I knew it would come in handy at some point. I just didn't know when.
Maybe now, once we've reflected, once we've had a few days to rest, recover, maybe so we can actually start using it because I think it could be really useful. Otherwise, I was just going to recommend, I think the Liverpool International Slavery Museum is really interesting and they have some good exhibitions on like the material culture of a slave ship and stuff. I mean, maybe you can't go all the way to Liverpool, but you can probably have a look online or email their online collections and see what else they've got going on there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I have a similar plea because, again, a literature person, I've never thought about images, even though I do drama. So not necessarily images, but still something material and visual. Until recently, I mentioned this yesterday in one of the panels too. I ran into the pictures in Richard Knowles's book, like the Sultan images. So now I want to go into early printed books and want to like go through the pages and like look at images and see I can make anything out of it, and if it's gonna, lead into a bigger research project. But the thing is, there is no like substantial record of such images in early printed book from a literature perspective at least. So I really love that we've had all these art historians so that it doesn't exist in literature, but I can go to art history for methodology. And then I checked that specific entry of Richard Knowles's at the Folger and it doesn't mention the images at all. So I don't know, like I don't even know what to ask for because I don't know the library end of things and I don't know how cataloging that would be possible because it's also like labor and time, right? Like you can't catalog every single image. But just an idea to throw out there. And it's for the Newbery to, think about.
Yeah, I love this suggestion that we should create like a visual database of all imagery, related to this period. And but what our Newbery catalog, I will brag, is pretty good about it. Won't indicate specifically what images, but if a book has images, woodcuts, engravings, our catalog record will make clear of that. I don't think that's true in all library catalogs, but our catalogers have done a pretty good job of indicating that. So when you do, and you can use the Newbery catalog since we have almost every printed book from the 16th, 17th century, more or less. We have a very good collection. You should be able to, use that as a resource along the line. But it is a tedious process, as being an art historian, hunting down images. And it would be, we have a couple great resources like Art Store, and you can use Internet Archive to look for materials easily. But sometimes it is just a matter of sleuthing. But I love this idea that we create like a visual database. And that was like at the heart of the Seeing Race project, was just to get a lot of images out there that hadn't really been studied. But and we clearly need to keep doing that. So it's good to hear.
Senan,
Sorry, go ahead, Drew.
You're looking at images of the Turk, right? That's
Yes,
of the
I
Sultan
want to.
of the
Yeah.
Sultan of Turkey.
Not necessarily at the book in the book I looked at, it was just the sultans. But now I'm thinking, what other images of Turks are there? Not necessarily just sultans, because I'm also thinking about the sources playwrights used and how that like circulation of imagery and then like technology on the stage, how they all like kind of informed each other and created this like representation. It's sort of in the early stages, very early stages, but yeah, overall
So-
Turks. Yeah.
So
There's
my
the- Go ahead,
Oh,
Drew. I'm gonna put
my-
some
my-
stuff in the chat.
My dissertation ends with the Grand Turk, right? That's like the conclusion. I can just send you a bunch of printed image, like, because I'm a medievalist, I work on illuminated manuscripts, and the end of my dissertation is the shift from painting to print and the fall of Constantinople, and I've got a bunch of Il Grano Turco prints that I can just send to you, and also the like historiography associated with those images as well.
Yes,
I'm very happy
please,
to share.
please.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Amber, do you want to go ahead? And then Elise.
Yeah, I also just wanted to recommend if you want images for Turks or any racialized images in general, it's one of the chapters I'm working on right now is on trade cards, cartes de commerce. There's a big collection at the British Library and the British Museum. And these are like cards, almost like business cards, which are given out by shops advertising the shop. And you have a lot called the Turk's head or the blackamoor's head. So I'm looking at the ones which are the blackamoor's head. But there's also the Indian Queen, which I'm looking at as well. So you have all of these mixed representations of race. You have blackness, you have Indigenous Americans, and then the Turk is represented as well. So I'm writing a chapter on them right now, but there's some good literature out there already, and it could be of use to anyone. But just because you were looking for images of the Turk, maybe it could help.
Elisa?
Sorry. Yeah, Senan, I've been thinking also the Koch library, the rare book library, which is amazing. I think you can find some great stuff there, and I'll send you the emails of the main people who are taking care of and they're just wonderful. So I think you can find many things there. And I was also thinking, I mean, last year was in Chicago, but a panel at the RCA with all the different people who presented today could be amazing just for future conferences. So just an idea to throw in there.
And just to quickly mention, we will, all the stuff, the great sources and suggestions you put in the chat, we can also compile a list and drop that in the Google Docs, since now everyone's actually going to click on it and get in dialogue with each other. So we'll do that too, just in case you're taking notes and you might miss something. We'll make that available.
Go ahead, Amber.
Part of the question of where next, rather than where next in the field, but where next with what we've just done, I was wondering if this is going to be continued, whether we will have one next year or in 2 years' time and invite other new scholars, and whether this would be a continued thing, whether you see this as part of like a ongoing program. And I was wondering where's next for this specific event.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's something we've been talking about quite a bit. I definitely would like to repeat this and do another round. Probably not next year, because we've already planned next year, if you can believe it. We planned pretty far in advance, but perhaps the year after we can, alternate. Maybe this is a good time to mention our Race and Dialogue series, which we're doing about twice a year, sometimes more. I'll put up at the end the next one's date and everything, but so we're trying to keep that going, which are more intimate conversations between two scholars that also have a Q&A element, and they're focused on one particular topic. But we definitely want to keep this going in some way. We also hold a graduate conference in January, which is a pretty big event. We received 105 applications this year. I think some of you have been part of it in the past. And so we want to keep that going as well. It's a broader event. And it's in person at the Newberry. But what's great about this is that doing it online, as we keep mentioning, it's brought people from around the world. So yeah, all this to say, yes, more soon.
Yes. Yeah, we
Yeah.
want to do more. And I just want to say that when we had this idea and we talked about doing it, and, we talked about the CFP, and I remember telling like Leah and Chris and Dylan, like, do you think anyone's going to apply? Like, we sent out the CFP and I was like, maybe we'll have like 2 sessions, maybe 3. And like, as you can see, it turned into 2 all day, and we couldn't even accept everybody who applied. Right. So it was like exciting, for me at least, to be like, oh, I'm doing a thing, I'm organizing alongside the Newbery, which I also do want to say that everything that's done in CRS is highly collaborative. Yes, I organized it, but I could not have done it without Leah, Chris, Dylan. We have Sheridan also behind the scenes. It's a truly collaborative group thing, and it wouldn't be possible without everybody. But yeah, so I also want to thank you all for applying, because this is exciting to see how many people are not just interested in PCRS, but are doing this work and want to be in dialogue with each other, and who are also early on in their careers, right? Because oftentimes at conferences, it's the big names, which is great because I love all the big names. They're amazing. And I really want to hear from people who are still thinking through things, who haven't quite figured out how to theorize something, and who have questions and who are interested in collaborating and being in conversation. So thank you all that's just my quick thank you, or wasn't even quick, but it's fine. But thank you all for applying and participating and being engaged, and for your enthusiasm in, where this could go next. It's really exciting. And so I want to pose another question, which is, like, what can the Newbery do to help? Is there something the Newbery can do to help as you're continuing these projects?
Yeah, I guess besides doing more of these, is there a way we can help facilitate meetings, or your make your research lives easier, conversations. We're very open to, collaborating, and we very much hope you will keep in touch. Yeah, Senan.
I'm not sure if this is already happening, but so for example, I know Arizona does race before race mentorship. Like, is there anything like that, or would you consider anything like that? That's it.
That's a great question. We haven't really considered anything like that. I think partly because, Race Before Race is doing that. But yeah, I think, and I will say that one of our goals was to, do a little bit something different than Race Before Race, and to make it more interdisciplinary and focus
And
as
international.
international, and to, as Yasmine said, also to focus more on the early career. And we actually consciously thought about we initially thought, oh, we'll have, chairs who are major figures in the field. And then we thought, let's just keep it more intimate, and not necessarily bring in the big names.
Although Noemi arguably.
Noemi was a big name, yeah, totally. But she's
totally a
also
big name.
she's also family, so it's a little different.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is, what kind of mentorship would be useful is a good question too. Like, I work in PCRS now, I'm very proud, but I don't feel like I could be a mentor in the way that maybe others could. But I think this is definitely worth exploring and thinking about.
I also want to encourage you to apply for the Race Before Race Mentorship Network. I'm a part of the Race Before Race community. I am a part of the Race Before Race Mentorship Network this year. I did it when I was finishing my dissertation, because I was like, I need mentorship. I'm leaving grad school. So it's also important to use all the different resources, right? If it's something the Newbery doesn't do, and like we know ACMRS does that so well, like apply for that,
Yeah,
but,
RSA also dabbles.
Oh,
And I was just, it has also had a mentorship program in the past. I don't think they do right now, but I know that there is going to be a panel if you're at RSA that I'm involved in, that's going to be a type of mentorship panel, which involves like CVs, editing and things like that. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, but go on, Senan.
I did check Race Before Race mentorship, but they only accept PhD candidates as the like that I need to be a candidate before I can apply, which I am not a candidate right now. So
That's
yeah,
good to know.
that's important to think about. I also want to highlight Laura's comment in the chat about an article or writing group that could potentially help with getting work out into the world. It seems like that's something several people are interested in. So like, we'll take note of that as well. And keep
Yes.
the ideas coming.
Yeah, that's wonderful. During the pandemic, our little center did quite a few writing groups and reading groups, which was really productive and wonderful. And I was just thinking like, oh, I kind of missed that. So we're trying to do more professional development work, definitely. Go ahead, Amber.
Yeah, the idea of a writing group sounds interesting. I was going to say also during the pandemic, I was part of a writing group, which I found really helpful for finishing my master's dissertation. We were a writing group. It was like a silent writing group, but then we had breaks where we could chat about what we found interesting in our writing. So we'd do 30 minutes of writing, 5-minute break, then another 30 minutes of writing, then a 20-minute break. And in our breaks, people would just be saying, oh, I was writing about this and I have this new source and it's so exciting, it's so great. And actually, maybe it could be a nice way for us all to like be motivated to get our writing and research done, but also to keep sharing like informally the little things we're working on and to kind of inspire each other. I don't know. It was just an idea.
Yeah, I would be happy to help facilitate something like this. And because the Newberry can be like a neutral space. And I know many of you are unicorns at your institutions doing work that nobody else is doing. So anyway, we can help you. We'd love to. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll help with that too. Through the powers of Zoom.
I just want to emphasize both of those, both Laura's idea and Amber's point about it, because so like I said, like in literature, they don't really look at visual things. And then I attended this, and it's especially Ariane's work. I'm definitely contacting her after this. But without this, I wouldn't have thought about it. And now that I think about it, like having a small like writing group with people who are working on similar things, not necessarily Turk, but at least looking at similar material like engraving. And then so that we have this collaborative space through, as it's needed, either interdisciplinary if that's what's needed, or so like not just thinking about let's get together and write, but also thinking about the content of what we're writing as we get together.
Okay, I'm just trying to think of a great way to connect you all. I think maybe it would be good, you could email our center and those of you interested in writing group, and then we could maybe put out a call just to those of us in this symposium, and I can help facilitate.
Any other ideas or comments before we release you from Zoom?
You all are troopers.
This is not necessarily professional, but Yasmine, behind you, is that from the tutors?
It actually is professional for me because I work on popular representations of the tutors, and I talk a lot about period dramas and putting like contemporary media alongside the early modern period. So yes, this is indeed Jonathan Rhys Meyers as Henry VIII glaring over my hair throughout the day. Yeah, I was before the symposium started today, I asked Leah, I was like, yesterday I kind of blocked him, and that was just like a feminist embodiment. And like today I'm kind of like, I don't know, accepting the challenge of him like peering out behind me.
It's good. It's been good to have him with us today. We appreciate
Yeah, I
that.
love it. The tutors was my first like entry point to the early modern Renaissance.
Me
Yeah.
too. And people say like TV is like, it's trash TV or it wasn't a good period drama. I got a PhD and I get invited to do talks to talk about this show and other work. So, who knew? I should write him a thank you letter or something. Really, I should have Beyonce in the back. I'm disappointed in myself now for not having
Beyonce too.
Books, but she's in another area of my apartment. So
She is. She's always with us.
she's
Yasmine.
ever present in the Renaissance Center.
We tried to get her sponsorship, but anyhow.
We did. When she was touring for the Renaissance tour, I was like, hello.
When she was in Chicago, we tried to send her some vibes, but anyways.
I know. I was like, I have to meet her. This is the way to meet her, through the Center for Renaissance Studies, obviously.
Okay. I think with this discussion now, we should segue into our final remarks. And I'm going to put up a slide for just to remind you all to come to our race and dialogue activities. And keep the conversation going. Here's our website for the Rates and Dialogue, and our symposium will live on this Zoom site as well. And then our next one is with Brandy Adams and Trudy Jiskra, specifically on book history, which I think will be of interest to a lot of you. So, but Yasmine, I'll let you have the final word. Thank you so much for organizing this. Thanks to all for coming.
I don't know. How do you top Beyonce as like a final? I'm just kidding. I'm going to keep it short. I, again, just want to thank you all for applying for this virtual symposium and for sharing your exciting new work with us. I hope you will continue the conversation and that a lot of your great ideas about how to stay in community will manifest. So we'll be looking to do that. And then I want to thank Leah Markey, Chris Fletcher, Dylan Bingham, Sheridan Shankin, and Noemi NDI as well, Lizzie, Dave, for jumping in and helping. Like I said, it's always a group effort and it's such a joy to collaborate with CRS. So thank you all and let the good work continue.